Guillaume Côté, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm good. After that introduction, makes me feel old.
Just for people listening, you don't have a long white beard or anything like that.
No, I know, but I feel like I've had a lot of interviews lately, and people, I guess in dance, when you're like, I'm retiring, people are always going, oh, is it because you're aging and this and that, and I feel like I feel younger than ever. The only thing is my knees. I guess if you took an X-ray of inside my knee joints,
It'd be...
that's probably where I show most of my age.
I do want to ask, why the stepping back and how are you feeling about it?
I feel great. I feel great because I've had the best opportunities. I've maximized my classical dance career at the National Ballet to its fullest, and it was my own decision to step away. I'm deciding to step away because the classical form, as beautiful and as incredible as it is, it's incredibly demanding on the body. You have to fit yourself not only in these sort of white tights, but you also have to fit yourself into these like very difficult sort of positions and also jumps and virtuoso kind of, ways of moving. And they're big ballets. They're also really, really set. So you're sort of like, you're expressing the choreography of others a lot.
Yeah.
And I was very well known for doing that. And now I really enjoy the sort of the more collaborative way of working. Also choreographing. I really love to generate work myself. And also, I have to say that characters, I love to portray characters, and I love to dive into a process of sort of, getting to know sort of a different way of thinking, different way of dancing, different ways of moving. And I felt like with the National Ballet, I have seen 26 years, I guess, of different choreographers and of different roles, and they've come and gone, and now I felt like it was getting a bit repetitive.
Yeah.
And it's as soon as you join the National Ballet of Canada, you have an expiration date.
Really?
You know that it's limited, just like Olympians or
Baseball players, anything like that.
Yeah, there's going to be a better dancer coming up, and also dancers get better with each generation. And now there's some younger dancers really excited to sort of step into these roles that I'm finding now a little bit more mundane, a little bit more difficult to be inspired by. So it was perfect timing.
It was time.
Yeah, and now I feel like I'm discovering a whole new type of I'm rediscovering my body as well, which is a really beautiful thing. Different ways of moving and exploring my body and exploring dance in general with contemporary dance. And there's so many movement patterns that we just don't do in a classical way, like with the classical form. So collaborating with all these other types of dance styles and dancers and actors, and it's feeding me in a whole different way.
We're going to talk a little bit about the new role and talk a little bit about what you get out of choreography versus sort of dancing someone else's steps a little bit later in the chat. But I want to go back a little bit with how it began. So almost 40 years ago, your parents, have a drink of water there. Your parents had a dance school in Lac-Saint-Jean in Quebec. You started dancing there when you were 4. I don't remember a lot from when I was 4, but do you remember anything from being 4 in those classes? Do you remember this feels right? This feels good?
I don't remember when I was 4. I mean, you know how it is. You sort of see videos of yourself and you're like, oh, I think I remember this. But the weirdest video that I've ever seen of myself, which I didn't remember, was myself in a church basement in Métabetchouan. For those of you who don't know where that is, it's by the Lac Saint-Jean, the Lake Saint-Jean, in northern Quebec.
Yeah.
And I was in the church basement, and we were all doing this little sort of like dance number. And because my family, my parents' families are very large, so my dad's family's 13 kids, my mom's family's 9 kids. They all had their kids, and they all had multiple kids. So then I had a lot of cousins. So there was like all these like people in this ballet school that my parents started because they wanted to support my parents. So there was all these boys, you know, I had all these guy cousins who were in gold spandex doing Puss in Boots in a church basement, kind of doing these like, you know, just pretending to be cats. So it was kind of interesting for me because I really grew up thinking this was totally great and normal because I was kind of isolated in this sort of little group until I got to like, you know, a little bit older in high school. And then I started getting bullied a lot in a small place like...
For what?
Well, for doing ballet, obviously, you know, like at that time. So it's also like the world has it's come very far in accepting ballet in a different way in the last 20 years. I mean, I've also been a big promoter of that because I for me to do ballet in a hockey town,
Right.
it was really tough for people to understand. So apart from my family, my direct family who danced and supported my parents, everyone else felt like it was very much a girl's thing to do.
Right.
It was very stereotypical of tutus and ballerinas and things. So I wasn't popular, that's for sure.
They picked on you a little bit?
Yeah, a lot. And then even when I joined the National Ballet School when I was 11 years old, so
Yeah.
I moved to Toronto and downtown. I didn't speak
11 years old?
Yeah, I was 11 and I didn't speak a word of English, you know. And it was during the referendum. Like my parents were separatists and they were very involved with that. And they were also in a region that is very, you know, and it was, you know, the referendum, which was like in the middle of this really weird political time. And I just kind of moved to Toronto and then suddenly everyone's questioning the separation of Quebec. And there was sort of tension between Quebec and Ontario and the rest of Canada. So it was a really odd time to sort of move to Toronto.
Yeah.
But then, you know, the really beautiful thing is the art kind of transcended all this because I really love to pursue ballet. And I didn't find a place in Quebec where I could do it at the level that I wanted to do it at.
My question about that is, I didn't know, and I bet people listening to this don't necessarily know, that to go to the National Ballet School requires leaving home, leaving your family at a really young age. Outside of the language, and I never thought about the idea that you were moving during the referendum and your parents were separatists, and there was there was a really interesting political time in Canada. What was the hardest thing just about leaving home at 11?
I think at that time, especially, it was the communication with the parents. Like, it's not always the case. Like, if you live in Toronto and you're very lucky,
you can live at home.
But at the time, you know, it was harder. There were no flights to Métabetchouan, you know. So like, it was like a 13-hour bus ride all the way up north. Also, just phone. You know, we didn't have FaceTime or anything like that. So there were just like 2 phone lines. So it was hard to communicate. It was expensive to call home and everything. So the hardest thing is suddenly you find yourself very alone very quickly, you know, and I had many nights of crying, you know, and it was like a really difficult 2 months. But the thing is, you start, I think you overcome it because you really understand that I think you're doing something that you really love to do. Like during the day, it's one thing, but you know, you also have support systems and you make friends on different levels at the boarding school. And and you bond truly with the people that you're there with. Yeah.
And it was something that, I guess, when does it go from something that your parents wanted you to do to something that you actually love to do?
That's a great question. You know, I still wonder about that sometimes. It's true. You know, my parents never really wanted me to do it. I think they just like the arts in general. I think they really love this idea of the abstract, in a sense that like sports is very competitive and it's very, you know, and especially at home in northern Quebec, it was a little bit borderline toxic masculinity a little bit. And so I think they really enjoyed that their young man, their young boy, was doing something that was very highly, you know, achieving, but at the same time didn't have this sort of competitive, you know, competition element to it. It was like competing with yourself more than anything else. And so I just started dancing because that school kind of was there, but they never forced me to do anything. I just never stopped. It's not that I wasn't the one who decided to start, but I also never had the urge to stop. So, right. And then at some point when I was, you know, 15 and I was at this ballet school, and then things were kind of going very well. Then I discovered the whole, again, portraying a role. And then I started also really loving being in this environment and being very stimulated. I think I do have ADD into a certain degree. And I think it's a really great field to be in. I think if you have a little bit of attention deficit, just because you're constantly stimulated physically, and there's always an element of danger. There's always this element of, you have to be paying attention, otherwise you can get hurt, or people around you can get hurt, and so I really truly gravitated towards towards staying there, and it wasn't until I was about 16 when you actually. Yeah, 15 when I graduated, and then you start making decisions whether or not you're going to turn this into a job or not. I still had hopes of becoming a rock star. So
were you playing in a?
Yeah, I was playing in a band, and it was going okay.
Original music, covers.
Original music, yeah, called the Neurotics, and we were playing bars, and it was a lot of fun, and and I thought I was pretty good, and then now I look back and I wasn't, but. The really great thing is I really enjoyed being on stage. I think that part of it was really, it was really stimulating.
What a secret, weird life that was, to be 15 and be in the National Ballet School, and then also in the nighttime to be this guy playing in greasy bars.
Yeah, it was crazy because I grew up also with a group of friends up north too who really enjoyed like death metal, like heavy metal and all that. So I grew up playing that too. Like I played that on the guitar a lot. And so I got to be very good at it because a lot of that music is actually really tough to play.
Yeah. Were you tapping?
Oh yeah, all that, like
pick sweeping?
Steve Vai and Joe Satriani and all that stuff.
Guillaume, I had no idea.
Yeah, I still do. That's what I listen to for my warm up.
When do you? I'm always very curious. I want to touch on a couple of things you said there, but I'm always very curious as to when people who are great at an art form sort of get the inkling that they're great at an art form. And it's a weird question to ask in Canada, especially because people, I think, generally go like, "Oh, well, I don't know." But I want to point this out for people who don't know. When you were 19, you danced the leading role of Prince Siegfried for the first time, making you the youngest person in the history of the National Ballet to dance in that role. Did you start to get a feeling? And I know this is hard for Canadians to answer, but did you start to get a feeling that I might be a little different than the other dancers my age?
Yeah, for sure. That there was it was a really nice feeling, for sure, to feel like I understood things differently, and I understood things. I just grew quickly. I think I had.
You noticed it. You noticed like, hey, I'm starting to get this a little bit quicker.
Yeah, and also I was at the right place at the right time.
Yeah.
And then the really beautiful thing is I have to pass it on to the people who educated me. Like they saw something in me, and I think in all situations, whether it's art, whether it's sports, it's really truly, it's about privilege in a sense that if you have the right teacher and if you have the right person who's going to develop your talent at the right time and give you the right attention and be the right type of teacher as well for you, then it's going to really take off. And I was very privileged to have that. And I recognize that so much that I always felt grateful, and I always felt very, I always wanted to be one of the boys, or I wanted to bring everybody along all the time, and I think that's why I was also good on stage, because if I played Romeo, I just really wanted Benvolio and Mercutio to be in on it with me as much as I was, and but I did feel like I was developing well, and then the nice thing is when I started traveling a lot around the world and dancing with different companies and things and being invited, and that really fed me in a way that it just kept kind of my curiosity. I was always very curious in nature, so things repeating for me is like torture. And so much of ballet is about repetition.
Yeah. So
much about ballet is tuning your body and doing it every single day and doing it exactly the same way every single day. But I was lucky to have teachers who made it interesting every day. But the really good thing is it kept changing, because I kept changing theaters and I kept changing partners and I kept changing. So, and also the really beautiful thing is dance changes all the time. You're never frozen into anything, right?
Let me. You mentioned earlier some tension issues you've had over the years, and I know all about that. And and it leads me to a question I had about I guess, what do you feel when you're dancing? So when the choreography is done, and you're dancing at that level, you know, I've seen you at the National Ballet a number of times. When you're actually on stage dancing, what's going on in your brain at that point? Is it flow state and kind of euphoria? Are you thinking the whole time, I got to put my foot right here, I got to put my foot right here, I have to watch out for this person? Can you talk me through how your brain works while you're dancing?
Sure.
Do you know what I mean?
I feel in so many ways it doesn't. It's the only place where I think when I have the greatest shows is when my brain does turn off and there's just one track, and the track is just what I'm doing in the present moment. And I had this conversation with my girlfriend recently too. Then she said, she misses meditating and she misses yoga so much as part of her routine in her life. And I said, I never really gravitated towards it because I feel like that's my yoga, that's my meditation. When I'm on stage, it's kind of like the whole world goes away, and then I sort of end up in this really beautiful place where the only thing that's happening is the here and now. And it's because the element of danger or the element of, of being watched and this whole pressure on your back to execute these things that are very difficult. And then you sort of end up in this flow for sure. I mean, there's days where, stuff doesn't happen, and then you fall into this, the floor's too slippery, and and oh my God, my back hurts.
That person didn't land their thing, which means
or
that,
or I didn't, and what are people thinking of me and this, and I've had moments on stage too where I snap my Achilles and things, not my Achilles, my ACL, and then then the whole world flashes before your career flashes before your eyes, and so it varies on the shows, but the great shows are the ones where the world goes away and you can focus on either your partner when you're Romeo and Juliet, or in the case of Hamlet, you're completely within your own egotistical mindset.
Stay there on the injury for a second, because we were talking about this. I've been lucky enough to be part of the Nutcracker twice as the Cannon doll.
Oh yeah, you were a big hit.
Come on.
Yeah.
Huge hit.
I know, you brought the house down.
I sold out the balcony, they told me.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. They were like, we weren't selling the balcony, and then we announced the public radio host, and then gangbusters.
I've heard it's legendary.
It's a legendary story,
Absolutely.
They don't ask me back because they don't want that many tickets sold.
No, and also it sucks for the prince.
Yeah.
He loses the stardom.
I remember being side stage and watching these incredibly graceful dancers that I had watched the day before in rehearsal. And they walked off stage after their dance, and they were going like this. They were exhausted. And then I think it was either you stepped in for somebody or someone had to step in for you like 2 minutes before curtain.
That was me stepping in for Peter Stanchik, yeah.
Because there was an injury right before, or something had happened right before the Nutcracker started.
Yeah, he was warming up and he pulled his calf.
And you had to, on like 2 minutes notice, get on stage and be the...
Yeah. I mean, they gave me, like 15 minutes, but that was a crazy quick turnover. Yeah.
My thing is when people, and I was watching the performance of you as Nijinsky and just watching. You talked about Olympians and professional athletes as an analog to the kind of work that you do. Mm-hmm. If they're hurt, say if I'm watching baseball and the pitcher's hurt, I can kind of tell, because he's allowed to wince a little bit. Uh-huh. He's allowed to move his shoulder back a little bit while he's pitching.
Yeah.
What strikes me about ballet is that you have to perform gracefully, perfectly, beautifully, and you might be in intense pain. You might be in intense pain. How do you do that?
Yeah, it's skill. We the thing is, it's that picture like on Instagram that everybody's seen of the iceberg. Like all of it, like so 90% of it is under the water.
Yeah,
and then like 10% is above. So I think that describes the ballet career very well. So we do all these sequences in the studio a million times before we get on stage. So we have systems, we have ways of making things look easy. Also, yeah, when when you are hurt and you're dealing with injuries, there's the medication obviously is one is a definite shortcut to not being in
But
pain.
you can't wince. You can't. Oh, you can't.
No,
you know.
you can't, and you got to wait till you get off stage. Usually, some ballets, and this will be also when we discuss Hamlet. But some ballets are made where you have some entrances and exits at the right time, so you always have kind of a moment to go and if you want to stretch your calf or if you want to do something or you need to get some physio. Sometimes during Nijinsky, I had times when I had physiotherapists backstage, and they would sort of like do treatment between entrances and things like that.
Wow, really?
Yeah, sometimes some things will shift, like either like the tibia will shift a bit and then suddenly everything's not lined up and then just to get through the show. But it's true, once you get out there, you have to. Yeah, nobody wants to watch a prince who's in pain, I don't think. So I think,
or a Cannondale who's in pain.
No,
That's why they say it's the hardest job. So let's talk a little bit about this world premiere of Hamlet coming up. You're collaborating once again with the playwright, actor, and director Robert Lepage on this one. You've choreographed the piece. You play the role of Hamlet. It's not your first time playing Hamlet. I can tell it's a big moment. I can tell it's the first big gig outside of the National Ballet ever.
Yeah.
And you have played Hamlet a bunch in the past.
Yeah.
Why? What is it about Hamlet that you're hanging your hat on?
Robert said that there's a few, including like Laurence Olivier and a few actors who have been said to say they want to play it before it's too late. And I guess I could say that as well. I've always wanted to play Hamlet in a way that I found thrilling. And I've played in the past, but most versions that I've played in the past have been more abstract representations of the story of Hamlet, which means, in dance, sometimes you have a version of a story, but then they sort of take liberties on how the story is told. So it was more like just a relationship between Hamlet and Ophelia. But Hamlet is so much more complex. The story is, and the character too, is so much more complex than that particular angle. So that's why I wanted to develop it as a choreographer. And yes, it's a huge deal. It's the first thing of that size of my company, Côté Danse, which I started during the pandemic. And it's been doing well. We had another production that toured BC last week, and it did very well in New York earlier this year. But this is a huge show. This is a very big show with Robert Lepage, Ex Machina. I'm putting everything I've got into this show, and I'm also starring in it, which is so incredibly tough to be in the show and create and co-create the show as well. So yeah, I'm going all out on this, and I didn't make it easy for myself too. The choreography is one of the hardest that I've ever had to do, just because it started with us sort of making scene by scene. We sort of started making each scene of the play, but minus the text, drawing some symbolism and things like that from the text.
Can we talk a little bit about that? Let's talk. Let's get an example out. I mean, yeah. I remember when I went to see you do Romeo and Juliet a few months last year, maybe something like that. I took my mom, and my mom.
Nice.
So I had never been to the ballet before I went to the National Ballet. My mom had never been to the ballet before, but she was a high school English teacher.
Oh, nice.
And brilliant. And she, after it was over, she looked at me and she said, I didn't know how they were going to do some of that. I didn't know how they were. Oh, and I see it now. So let's just talk Hamlet for a second. Let's say that the scene that most people know in Hamlet is the to be or not to be. That is the question scene.
Yeah.
Let's just use that as an example. You don't have access to one of the most famous texts in the world.
No,
you don't have
true.
access to speak some of the most famous texts in the world. You as a choreographer, how do you approach that?
So, to be or not to be was something that where he's questioning his sort of existence in general and suicide and all these thoughts that he has in his head of why even living. So in our production, I've had to have a formation in sword fighting and all this sort of sword playing, and so I have a big solo where I play with a sword. I'm sort of training and doing my sword exercises, and I cut myself, and then as I cut myself, sort of I look at the wound and I sort of draw blood from it on stage. And then I sort of start to look at it, and I sort of, as you would, you sort of start sucking the blood, and then you start looking at your veins, right? And then he starts looking at his pulse, and then takes the blade that he has in his other hand and puts it right up against his wrist. And then takes a pause and then feels the pulse in his neck. So then he takes his blade and then moves it back all the way to his neck. And then takes some deep breaths and considers for a moment, sort of slide, and then puts the blade down and then decides. And all of that, to be or not to be, comes across within those three little actions. It's kind of chilling because it's kind of this, it's true. It's a moment that all of these thoughts kind of run through, and that's what I do when I'm sort of going through those motions, is I'm listening to those words in my mind, but those actions to me resonate very, very strongly. And to an audience, I think it's understood right away. You understand that this person is struggling with this idea of even continuing living if it's this situation that they're in.
Are there things that dance can do to portray a story like that the spoken word can't do?
I wouldn't say. I don't know if it's compare. Like, I don't know if I would compare like it can't in words and it can in dance. What I would say though is that it's different. It's a different medium altogether. So the really beautiful thing is, if you listen to a piece of music, you're in a different world than if you listen to a text. But if the piece of music is inspired by the text, you won't get the text, but you'll get something else. So in the same way, the really beautiful thing about the Hamlet that we've put together is very narrative. So it's with Lepage, Robert Lepage, and he's an incredible storyteller. So the story comes across. So we another thing too that I thought was really interesting, and you named Romeo and Juliet. And I thought that
I should say it's a role you became really well known for.
Yes. Yeah. And also I had the chance to also work on the creation of Romeo and Juliet with Alexei Ratmansky, one of the most famous Ukrainian choreographers of all time.
And worked with you on that to develop that Romeo for you, right?
That's right.
That's
exactly.
Right,
yeah. And I remember him actually bringing in the text in the room, and there was one section when Romeo and Juliet meet, and there's the really famous palm to palm quote, and he wanted us to just like keep creating ideas on how we could portray that one sentence through dance. And it was such a beautiful thing because suddenly the one sentence generated all these beautiful movements. And to this day, when I dance this, it gives me chills because I feel like it has so much meaning to it. But it's different than the sentence, but it's different. It's rich. It's rich in another way. So in the same way with Hamlet, like, that this too solid flesh would melt, thaw and resolve itself into a dew. Like how beautiful those. Even to start your first solo, melting flesh, and how would you portray that as a dancer, as a cannonball? How would you do that, It's
Are there no cannonballs in Hamlet? Because I'm willing to audition for it.
I'm starting to think we should have, at least a special guest.
I tell you one thing I'm getting from this conversation so far is that, and I hope you can talk about this a little bit, is that after decades of mirroring someone else's movements, of being taught someone else's movements, you're getting something different out of creating your own choreography.
Absolutely. I mean, I still love to interpret other people's work. Yeah. Because in so many ways, it still demands just as much imagination. That's why I love dance as well, because it's not like we're not saying the sentences that somebody wrote. We're actually in putting life into sequences of movement. It's a different thing. So that's also, I worked with Roland Petit, who's one of the most famous choreographers of all time. He was 91 or something by the time we worked together at La Scala, and I did a ballet of his called Je nomme la mort. And what was interesting is after the show, he came to me and he said, he said one of the best compliments I think that anyone's ever said to me is, when I watch these choreographies, I watched a million times. But when I watch you do it, it's like it's the first time. So I thought, okay, that's why I love to work even with other people's choreography. I think we can all have unique qualities that we bring to a role that's been done a million times.
But when you work with some of the greatest choreographers of all time, and it's time for you to start choreographing yourself. I mean, you've been doing that for a number of years, but now with this project you're doing with Hamlet, it's a whole different level. It's sort of your thing.
That's right.
Give me an example of something you're taking from working with some of the greatest choreographers of all time that you brought to the work here.
Well, just like working with Alexei Ratmansky when it comes to the tools that a great choreographer will use, and always be a great choreographer is naturally a great director as well, because he will, like, every movement needs to mean something. we're no longer in the era where you can just gyrate on stage and do fun things and people accept that. Not with dance at the level that I enjoy anyway. So every movement has to mean something to you and it has to mean something to the audience, and it has to be completely driven by something. So that's the one thing I've learned from John Neumeyer, who's a choreographer, Nijinsky, from Alexei Ratmansky, from Roland Petit, from all these amazing choreographers, is that first and foremost you have to know why. The why. Why are you dancing this move? Why are you doing this? How do you relate to the person that is on stage? How do you relate to your environment? How do you relate to space? And how do you relate to your audience, right? So as a choreographer, especially with Hamlet, I wanted to keep it minimal in some way. So it was only the movements that made an emotional impact that remained. So there was nothing excess. Already we had so much that was generated from just the mere narrative. Mm-hmm. So it was important for me to keep it to every single thing that is there has importance. So I would say that was sort of part of the creation. And also, as I become a little bit more aware of my sort of my creativity, I become way more aware that simplicity goes a long way.
You mentioned some of the work you've been doing all around the world there. I mean, you were mentioning that choreographer you worked with who was in his 90s?
Roland Petit, yeah.
And where was that? Was that here or was that?
No, it was at La Scala in Milan. Yeah.
So you danced in Paris too? I mean, you've danced sort of all over the world. But when I was introducing you and when we were doing research for this, it's very clear that you've become at a very young age, one of the greatest and most accomplished Canadian ballet dancers of all time. My guess is, someone at your level is getting Paris and London and New York, and you could have written your ticket to go anywhere. If you don't mind me asking, what kept you in Toronto at the National Ballet? What kept you? You're doing the show now in Canada. What's kept you here?
I think it's the people. It's my audience and Karen Kane.
Really, Karen Kane?
Yeah. Karen Kane took over the National Ballet of Canada at a time when I was really wanting to leave.
Yeah.
And she allowed me to develop as an artist in very beautiful ways. She understood that I needed to travel because she did. She gave me lots of freedom to explore and to be with choreographers that I needed to be with, and also to create and to have the flexibility to be here. And then I got to experience both. I experienced all those beautiful big stages without having to leave. Also, Toronto to me, I love Canada. Mm-hmm. I love Canada in a way that I'm very patriotic. I feel like we have a really wonderful art scene.
Ironic, given the story you were telling me about being a kid in northern Quebec, coming to town during the referendum. All of a sudden, you're fully patriotic.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's very true. And now I have 2 children, and they're very much Franco-Ontarian. But it's a beautiful thing because I've grown up here, and I've loved I also love contributing to the arts in Canada in a way that I felt like I've seen dance change in my 20 years in the field, 25 years in the field, and I still feel like there's so much more that we can do.
What do you want from your next chapter here? We're closing up one chapter long chapter at the National Ballet. What do you want for the next chapter of your career?
I want to keep exploring. There's a really beautiful art being developed in Canada. I would say, from other creators like Crystal Pite and Jonathan Young, who have created some amazing dance theater works. There's also, all these really amazing talents coming out of the National Ballet of Canada. There's also all these different companies all across Canada and America as well. What I'd like to do is I'd like to have Côté Dance become one of those companies that travels around the world, that creates original dance theater works. But also, I'm always hungry for collaborations. So I'd like to keep collaborating with different art forms as well, multimedia and things like that, to expand movement in general.
Yeah, that piece you did with Robert Lepage, the piece I saw at the National Ballet.
The frame by frame.
Frame by frame. It was unbelievable with the shots. What was the name of the filmmaker again?
Norman McLaren.
McLaren's films and shots of and the multimedia form. It was really amazing. It was beautiful.
Yeah, Yeah, no, it's really exciting when things can come together and gel very well. So I really hope Côté Danse can keep doing that. And also, I do really enjoy. Enjoy some downtime. So hopefully I can find some time.
Good luck. Good luck.
Some time for that one day.
Guillaume, that was beautiful. Lovely to hear about your path. I'm so excited for the new path that you're on. You've been a big part of my own ballet learnings.
Good.
You were the first ballet dancer I think I spoke to on this show.
Amazing.
So it's great to get a chance to talk to you again. Good luck with everything.
Thank you, and I'm glad that I was able to contribute to your love to dance.